Europe has just experienced one of the most chaotic moments in the aviation industry. In just 24 hours, over 3,000 flights were cancelled, affecting more than 1 million travelers. At some of the largest airports on the continent, 1-inch 5 flights cannot take off. From Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle, to Schiphol, airports that were once considered perfectly functioning machines, where every minute a plane takes off or lands. But in just one day, thousands of flights disappeared from the schedule. Tens of thousands of passengers were stranded. Long lines in front of the service counters stretched for hours, and many planes had to remain stationary on the runway, unable to leave the airport. What has caused the busiest transportation hubs in Europe to fall into chaos in such a short time? In today's video, we will sequentially explore the 10 largest airports in Europe that are being most heavily affected, and what is really happening behind the flight cancelled signs that are covering the terminals across this continent. If someone had told you last year that Heathrow would become quiet, you might have laughed in their face. In 2025, this airport just celebrated a record 46 million passengers. However, look at the electronic board on the 5th of March 2026. There were 43 cancelled flights and 113 delayed flights. These numbers are not just dry statistics. They are the size of thousands of passengers stranded in the cold corridors. The reason for this chaos? Very simple, but also very brutal. War. When the Middle Eastern corridor was abruptly closed due to the Iran conflict, Heathrow, which is critically dependent on flights to and from Asia and Europe, suddenly found itself like a giant with its Achilles heel severed. Now, to get you from London to Singapore or Tokyo, airlines have to undertake a crusade around the Caucasus or Egypt. As a result, flight times have increased by 2 to 4 hours per leg, leading to jet fuel prices reaching $2.45 per gallon by the end of February 2026. Humanity has spent decades developing the fastest, most modern jet engines, only to now have the operational system force us to fly slower, more expensively, and more exhaustingly just because of lines drawn on a military map. Indeed, it is a great leap forward into wastefulness. Don't forget, Heathrow is also a monster of transportation, with 1.55 million tons of cargo in 2025. Most of that cargo is right beneath your feet in the belly of passenger planes. When the flight is cancelled, the cargo transport capacity disappears as well. The cost of Asia-Europe transportation has skyrocketed by 45%. This means that the latest smartphones, specialized medications, or even imported food on the dining tables of Londoners are becoming more luxurious than ever. Stepping out of the terminal, the scene is even more desperate. The restaurants around the airport, once bustling, are now starting to empty because no one has the heart to enjoy them anymore. On the contrary, the surrounding hotels are thriving in a way no one desires. They are filling their rooms with stranded passengers, those who are exhausted from waiting for a flight announcement that never comes. What will happen when an airport that once connected the whole world loses its most important routes? Can Heathrow maintain its status as Europe's hub? Or will it gradually become a relic of the once glorious era of globalization if the Asia-Europe flight corridors continue to be choked? I don't know what your answer is, but looking at those empty waiting chairs, I see an indescribable sense of instability. What do you think about the future of the European sky? Please leave your comments below so we can discuss together. But Heathrow is not the only place feeling this shock. There is another fortress on the European continent that is also trembling. If Heathrow is the heart, then CDG is the lungs of French aviation. In 2025, this place just breathed the atmosphere of freedom with 72 million passengers. Yet, on the 5th of March 2026 alone, this lung began to suffocate. 27 flights were cancelled and 125 were delayed. These numbers are not just the inconvenience of a few missed flights. They are a sign of a double shock hitting the second largest economy in Europe. Why is it called a double shock? The first consequence is clearly visible on the faces of the passengers missing their connecting flights from the Middle East. But look deeper into the belly of the iron birds lying motionless on the runway. CDG is a monster of transportation with 1.9 million tons of cargo each year. When commercial flights were cut, a tightening of the chest began to spread throughout the French economy. From emergency pharmaceutical shipments, sophisticated electronic components to luxury items, the pride of the City of Light, all are facing the same fate, being trapped or burdened with skyrocketing logistics costs. Shipping costs from Asia have skyrocketed. And believe me, this figure will soon appear on your shopping bills at retail stores across Europe. We pride ourselves on a flat and connected world, only to realize that just a few bottlenecks in the Middle East tightening can suddenly make the supply chain of a superpower as fragile as a sandcastle. It's ridiculous that to transport a package or a person from Paris to the East, people now have to choose bizarre routes like flying back through North America. To chase the rising sun, we have to choose the path flying towards the setting sun. That's not tourism. It's an expensive escape from harsh geopolitical realities. Some French travel agencies have begun to note an unprecedented wave of itinerary changes, as trips to Japan or Australia have now become absurdly expensive. What do you think? Are we returning to an era where traveling from one continent to another is an expedition reserved only for the super rich? Leave your thoughts, and we will discuss together. If you find these hidden aspects worth paying attention to, please subscribe so you don't miss the next developments. Because right now, there is another fortress in Europe facing pressure even more suffocating than Paris. If France is struggling with luxury goods, in Frankfurt, the Germans are witnessing the world's most precise machines starting to make dry, grinding noises. Frankfurt is not just an airport. It is the central control room of the German economic tank. 15 flights were cancelled, and 90 were delayed just after the tremor on March 5th. For the Germans, a train being delayed by a few minutes is already a disaster. So imagine the chaos when dozens of giant iron birds are immobilized on the runway. The precision of the Germans suddenly became meaningless in the face of geopolitical upheavals thousands of miles away. Frankfurt is the logistics heart of the entire continent, with a cargo output of up to 2.1 million tons per year. When the Middle Eastern corridor was closed, the industrial supply chain, which was Germany's pride, suddenly fell into a state of oxygen deprivation. Machine components, car parts, or high-tech equipment cannot wait for flights that take hours to detour. Lufthansa is having to strain to redesign its entire schedule. Flights to East Asia now have to take detours around conflict zones. As a result, flight times have increased, crew costs have risen, and fuel bills have skyrocketed faster than takeoff speeds. We have spent centuries building industrial empires based on optimizing every second, only to now have the entire economy hold its breath, waiting to see whether a few politicians will decide to open or close a flight corridor over the desert. The autonomy of a superpower turns out to be in the hands of variables they can never control. In the medium term, the outlook is not very bright. Many long-haul routes may have their frequencies reduced. A meticulously calculated global flight network built over decades is being torn apart equals together with makeshift routes. Can Frankfurt maintain its role as Europe's logistics hub when the shortcuts in the sky are no longer available? And what will happen to the cost of goods if the cost per flight hour continues to skyrocket? Are we moving towards an era of connectivity, or are we witnessing new walls being erected in the sky? We have just left the discipline of the Germans to arrive at Amsterdam Schiphol, one of the operational wonders of the world. But don't be fooled by the tulip fields or windmills, because at KLM's main hub, a storm is quietly sweeping through the terminals. 68.8 million passengers, symbolizing busyness, have shown signs of cracks. But today's picture is painted in gloomy shades. 31 flights cancelled and 98 delayed. This number seems a bit less than Heathrow, but the way it suffocates the Dutch economy is painfully unique. At Schiphol, there is a number you need to remember. 44% of the cargo is not on dedicated cargo planes, but in the belly of the very plane you take for your travels. This means that when a flight is cancelled due to the closure of the Middle Eastern flight corridor, nearly half of this airport's logistics capacity also vanishes immediately. 1.43 million tons of cargo each year are not just numbers. They are the heartbeat of global trade. It turns out that the belly of the aviation industry is so vulnerable. When commercial flights were disrupted, European importers fell into a silent panic. They have to accept paying exorbitant fees to keep the supply chain from collapsing, or despairingly watch their goods being transferred to sea routes, where shipping times are measured in months rather than hours. We build the most modern airports to shorten global distances, but in the end, an entire supply chain is having to walk on the sea just because of disputes on land. The modernity of the 21st century seems to be bowing down to transportation methods from the colonial era. Are Europe's supply chains strong enough to adapt to such systemic shocks? Or are we witnessing the end of the just-in-time shipping era that we once revered? Schiphol is at a crossroads. If the Asia-Europe flight corridors continue to be tightly locked, the Netherlands may have to redefine its role as a gateway. Is this just a temporary ripple, or will a long-term change redraw the global trade map? We often think of Rome Fiumicino as a love song of vacations, where the laughter of tourists mingles with the Mediterranean sunshine. But today, that love song is being interrupted by notes of deep anxiety. Fiumicino is Italy's largest international gateway, welcoming up to 40 million passengers in 2025. This is the headquarters of ITA Airways, and a crucial bridge connecting Europe with the Middle East and Asia. However, when the specter of the US-Iran conflict escalated in late February 2026, this bridge suddenly became unstable. Imagine the flights to Bangkok, Tokyo, or Delhi, once the pride of this airport, now having to make painful twists on the map. Instead of flying straight, pilots have to navigate their iron birds in circles of thousands of kilometers to avoid the war zone. What are the consequences? A direct attack on wallets. Jet fuel prices surged by 7% in just 2 short weeks at the end of February. Airlines have no choice but to force passengers to share this expense. Dream vacations in Asia have suddenly become a luxury beyond the reach of Italy's middle class. The pain doesn't just stop at the silent waiting lounges. In Rome, tourism is not just an industry, it is the lifeblood. When long-haul flights are cut, a terrifying domino effect begins. Empty rows of seats on planes turn into empty tables in restaurants, unoccupied rooms in hotels, and long lines of taxis idling outside the airport lobby. We have just left Rome for Madrid, where the brilliant sunshine of Spain seems unable to dispel the darkness enveloping the runways of Madrid Barajas. This is an airport built for imperial ambitions, a symbol connecting the old continent and Latin America, which once served up to 60 million passengers in 2025. But in the world of aviation, no one is an island unto themselves. When the Middle Eastern flight corridors were abruptly closed, Madrid Barajas suddenly found itself in a peculiar situation. To reach Asia, the iron birds from here have no choice but to make exhausting detours all the way through North Africa. You know, in an industry where profits are sometimes as thin as a sheet of paper, extending a journey by a few hours is enough to turn a money-making route into a financial burden. Just a slight increase in fuel costs by a few %, and the entire spreadsheet of the airlines will be painted red. The consequence is a silent exodus that is taking place. Airlines are starting to adjust schedules, reduce frequencies, or, more ruthlessly, eliminate routes that are no longer profitable to focus on safer routes. And the ones who ultimately bear the brunt are none other than you, the passengers. A trip from Madrid to the east, which originally took 11 hours of your life, can now stretch to 14 or 15 hours. Ticket prices are not just increasing, but dancing wildly due to the severe shortage of seats. Will we accept spending more money just to get a cramped seat for a longer period of time? Or is this the milestone marking the end of the era of cheap intercontinental travel that we once took for granted? Perhaps the travel habits of Europeans are facing a forced overhaul. People will start reconsidering all their plans, choosing closer destinations instead of accepting being held captive in the sky for half a day. Which option would you choose? We are moving eastward, where the heat of conflicts begins to scorch the skin. Welcome to Athens International Airport, the gateway of the gods, but currently resembling a lonely outpost in the midst of geopolitical turmoil. With around 28 million passengers each year, Athens used to be the filter funnel for tourists heading to Greece's Paradise Islands. But the geographical location, once an invaluable gift that helped Athens connect Europe with the Gulf and Asia, has now become a critical weakness. Athens is too close to the Middle East, so close that just a wisp of smoke rising on the other side of the Mediterranean, and this airport will immediately feel the tremor. When tensions escalated in early 2026, airlines no longer dared to take risks. The once busy direct flights from Athens to the Gulf region have been ruthlessly cut. The remaining flights are forced to make costly detours. Did you know that in the world of iron birds, each hour of flight can burn through tens of thousands of USD? It's not just fuel money, it's the blood of airlines leaking into the sky. Greece has spent thousands of years telling tales of conquering the seas, but now their tourism industry is being held captive by a sky no longer peaceful. It's ironic that guests from afar are willing to spend money to admire ancient ruins, but the modern aviation system is turning these very airports into temporary ruins of connectivity. For a country where tourism accounts for 1/5 of GDP, like Greece, this is a chain disaster. When airfare skyrocketed to compensate for the detours, the number of international visitors began to decline significantly. Not only have the waiting lounges at Athens airport become quiet, but the hotels in Plaka and the resorts on Santorini Island are also starting to feel the chill despite summer approaching. The taxis lie basking in the sun. The restaurant owners gaze out at the empty streets. All of them are victims of a game they were never invited to play. With around 31 million passengers each year, Vienna does not strive to become a giant. Instead, it chooses to be the perfect hinge connecting Western Europe and Eastern Europe. However, in the context of traditional flight corridors being ablaze due to the US-Iran conflict, this hinge is being twisted under unprecedented pressure. When the major centers were paralyzed, people began flocking to Vienna as a last resort. But don't be too quick to think this is a golden opportunity. For Austrian Airlines and the airport management, this is a logistical nightmare. The flight schedule, which was programmed down to the exact second, now has to be completely disrupted. The flight crew and cabin crew were thrust into a dizzying rotation. Remember, in aviation, time is not just money. It is a domino effect on personnel. When a flight has to take a detour to avoid a war zone, an extended journey by a few hours means skyrocketing labor costs, pilots' rest time being squeezed, and ultimately, the entire system falling into a state of overload. We praise Vienna as a symbol of stability and neutrality, only for it to now become a place absorbing the fragments of a collapsing global aviation system. It turns out that in a world where the skies are divided, there is no truly safe buffer zone. What is the result? The inefficiency is starting to become apparent. The flight routes that were once golden geese have now become burdensome due to excessively high operating costs. Airlines are forced to face a ruthless choice: either reduce flight frequency or completely change their long-haul flight strategy. Can Vienna take advantage of this chaos to become a new, sustainable transfer hub in Europe? Or is this just a temporary solution, a makeshift stopover until the other giants figure out how to adapt? Welcome to Warsaw Chopin, an airport named after a genius composer. But the tune it is currently playing is full of discordant notes. With around 19 million passengers each year, Warsaw is not a giant like Paris or Frankfurt, but it is Poland's burning ambition to turn Eastern Europe into a new transit hub. This is the headquarters of LOT Polish Airlines, an airline that has been striving to extend its tentacles into the lucrative Asian market. However, when the Middle Eastern corridor was frozen due to the US-Iran conflict in early 2026, these octopus tentacles suddenly became stuck. The difference between a giant airline and a mid-sized airline like LOT lies in its ability to take a hit. When flights to Tokyo or Seoul have to be extended to avoid the war zone, the skyrocketing fuel and personnel costs will deliver a fatal blow to the balance sheet. The wealthy can absorb losses to maintain market share. But for smaller airlines in Warsaw, every extra mile flown is a step closer to the brink of exhaustion. Warsaw is currently trying to cling to the northern flight corridor, the route through the Caucasus and Central Asia. It sounds like an escape route, But in reality, this corridor is so narrow that it's suffocating. When a multitude of flights from across Europe converge here in search of a route to the east, the northern skies suddenly become a massive bottleneck. The risk of flight delays, air traffic congestion, and crew fatigue are turning Warsaw into a gamble full of risks for any passenger looking to save time. We talk about the rise of Eastern Europe as a new counterbalance. But just one incident, thousands of miles away, can suddenly make all those ambitions as fragile as an unfinished march. It turns out that the right to dominate the skies does not lie in newly constructed runways, but in airspaces where you never have a voice. The final stop on this tumultuous journey is not in the heart of the mainland, but on an island, standing alone amidst the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean. Welcome to Larnaca Airport, Cyprus, a place where, from the aeroplane window, you can feel the heat of the Middle East just a few hundred kilometers away. Larnaca is not a fortress like Heathrow or a factory like Frankfurt. With 8 million passengers each year, it resembles a peaceful stopover. However, the geographical location, which was once a gold mine for Cyprus to become a resort paradise, is now turning this airport into a barometer of fear. In the aviation industry, risk does not only lie in missiles, it lies in the perception of risk. When tensions escalate, passenger sentiment changes faster than the speed of sound. Some people began to worry, while others quietly pressed the cancel trip button. Airlines hold their breath, monitoring every security update. Tourists are extremely sensitive to instability. When they feel the breeze from the east carrying the scent of unease instead of the smell of sea salt, they will immediately turn their backs to seek safer sandy shores on the other side of the continent. For a country where tourism is the breath of life, the lifeblood of the economy like Cyprus, any shock in Larnaca is like a chest pain spreading throughout the entire body. Hotels, restaurants, and even the smallest services on the island are all holding their breath in anticipation. If the waiting halls in Larnaca continue to be devoid of passengers, we are not just talking about flight cancellations, but about the destruction of the livelihoods of millions of people. So we have just passed through the 10 Achilles heels of European skies, from giants like Heathrow to the frontline island of Larnaca. The silent waiting lounges, the bright red electronic boards displaying flight cancellations are not merely inconveniences for a few passengers. That is a sign that the old world order, where we could fly anywhere at low cost and with absolute connectivity, is gradually collapsing. In a world where the lines on military maps begin to choke commercial flight paths, are you ready to accept a new reality? A reality where intercontinental travel becomes a privilege of the elite and international goods become luxury items? Or do you believe that humanity will find another way for the sky? Don't keep those thoughts to yourself. Leave a comment below, and we will discuss the future of travel together. If you find these analyses provide a fresh and impactful perspective, don't forget, hit like so this video reaches more people. Share it with friends who are also planning to fly this year. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the journey to decode the world's upheavals has just begun. The content in this video is compiled based on data, aviation reports, and the actual situation as of March 2026. The information about the number of flights and fuel costs is for reference at the time of broadcast and may change rapidly depending on the actual developments in the geopolitical situation. The video is not intended to criticize any country or organization, but rather to focus on analyzing the systemic impacts on the aviation industry and the global economy. We encourage viewers to verify information from official airlines before making personal travel plans.